I'm Ari Redboard. Welcome to TRM Talks. TRM Talks is brought to you by TRM Labs, the leading provider of blockchain intelligence and anti-money laundering software. Just hours ago, President Biden signed a long-awaited crypto executive order on ensuring responsible innovation in digital assets. The order sets forth a national policy for cryptocurrency across 6 key priorities: consumer and investor protection, financial stability, illicit finance, U.S. leadership in the global financial system, economic competitiveness, financial inclusion, and responsible innovation. So what do we do at TRM Labs? A couple hours later, we have true subject matter experts joining us to discuss the EO and the impact on the cryptocurrency industry and really the cryptocurrency ecosystem. So today we are joined by Carole House of the White House National Security Council, Teana Baker-Taylor, who heads up crypto policy for the Chamber of Digital Commerce, and Dante Disparte of Circle. Thank you so much to all 3 of you. I can't think of a better group to discuss this today, and I definitely can't think of a better group to jump on a couple hours notice. So thank you all so much for coming on TRM Talks today. Carole, and I'm going to kick it off with you. Obviously, you are intimately involved in sort of the process here from the National Security Council perspective. Can you sort of tell folks, A, what does this say? And maybe a little inside baseball, sort of what was the thinking behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to give that insight and thrilled to have the opportunity to share such an important administration initiative. So on the thinking here, I think that the administration has seen explosive growth in the digital asset market, and they see that the rise in digital assets creates an opportunity to reinforce American leadership in the global financial system and on the technological frontier. The administration, though, has also seen that there's substantial implications and risks posed to consumer protection, financial stability, national security, and climate risk. So based on all of that and the need to establish that the U.S. must maintain technological leadership in this rapidly growing space, the president has now signed this executive order outlining the first ever whole of government approach to addressing the risks and harnessing the potential benefits of digital assets and their underlying technologies. So very excited about all of those. You already outlined the key policy objectives, but really what it points to is it outlines each of those policy objectives and the direction that the president wants the digital asset sector to innovate in and develop in. It points all agencies to be focused in the same direction to making sure that our regulatory regime, use of other tools like enforcement authorities, as well as research and development and other authorities available to the U.S. government are driving the development of the digital asset ecosystem consistent with each of these objectives. So this is a really incredible opportunity and statement that's been reinforced across the entire administration. Statements by Secretary Blinken, Secretary Raimondo, and Secretary Yellen, of course. And we've also had a great blog post that came out from the Office of Science and Technology Policy that speaks to the importance of this technology and everything that underpins it, but also the need for ensuring that there is equity and other types of controls to protect Americans integrated into the technology. So I think that there's a really critical signal there that industry should be taking, kind of similar to the cyber EO that we put out last year related to secure software development. This is a signal to industry to build in and integrate controls like identity and sanction screening and consumer protections into the ecosystem. And the U.S. government will be considering how to leverage their authorities to make sure that innovation is in fact responsible.
Carole, I'm going to stay with you for one moment, just dig in a little bit. One thing that the EO does is really sort of task the interagency, in a really more coordinated way than you usually see, right? It's not just like Treasury do this, SEC do that. It's sort of calling for more of coordination amongst different agencies to do what? Like sort of what are a couple just examples of what the interagency are being tasked with? It seems like a lot of writing. A lot of reports are coming out. But what are some of those specifics behind that?
Great. So first, the Interagency Policy Committee that's being stood up will be chaired by the APNSA, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, as well as the Assistant to the President on Economic Policy, Brian Deese. Through that Interagency Policy Committee, we are bringing together a wide spectrum of agencies across the U.S. government. So you'll see those with authorities related to research and development, like the National Science Foundation, those looking at humanitarian and human rights equities, like the Departments of State and USAID, and then, of course, Treasury and the financial regulators. So first, I'll say that unprecedented whole of government coordination that's going to happen will help make sure that our approach is reinforced and integrated into the policy and other actions that are driven by the entire U.S. government. Aside from that, I think that you're also going to see a lot of, you mentioned a lot of reports. So yes, there's a lot of assessment and looking specifically at a couple of key risk areas as well as potential benefits that need to be explored further to determine what are the specific policy frameworks that we want to put in place, again, in full partnership with the regulatory community. So, for example, within 120 days of the National Anti-Money Laundering Strategy, there will be a coordinated action plan that will be developed using whole of government authorities to mitigate digital asset illicit finance risks. You'll also see within 180 days a report on the future of money and payment systems, a report on implications for consumers posed by digital assets, also a technological evaluation led by the Office of Science and Technology Policy on the technological infrastructure and capacity needed to pursue a U.S. central bank digital currency. You're also going to see some unprecedented international engagement and U.S. competitiveness frameworks that have never been created before. Of course, it builds on ongoing efforts across the U.S. government, but now we'll create a framework that leverages all agencies together in a mutually reinforcing way to achieve these objectives.
Carole, thank you so much. I think one thing I was struck by was really that acknowledgement that crypto is a global issue, and that this idea of sort of reaching out around CBDCs in coordinated effort, and then also from sort of an AML, illicit finance perspective, and really so many other pieces of this had that kind of international component to ensure American competitiveness and leadership, which was one of my, top two probably takeaways from this. Teana, you are very much sort of a representative or voice for, the crypto industry. I had some I had a big smile on my face in many respects when I read this morning, because I think it's very positive about the technology itself, obviously kind of understanding the risks and challenges. Is that sort of consistent with your thinking here on this?
Yeah, Ari, I think it is. So, overall, we were really encouraged and think that the EO is a very positive development. In 2019, the Chamber released what we call the National Action Plan for Blockchain. And one of the key tenets of that was encouraging public and private sector innovation and partnership to really kind of clearly articulate a national plan for blockchain. And so I think that one of the exciting things about this is that this executive order intends to do that. I think the other kind of key takeaway for us is that it really reinforces that the US government is taking digital assets seriously, that crypto is here to stay, and that the next several years will probably be focused on developing a regulatory regime, which we agree is absolutely critical to keep the US competitive, whilst maintaining, consumer protections. A couple of things that I found particularly noteworthy was that the first section describes responsibility to, protect consumers and investors, and in the rollout of crypto adoption. And the Chamber's been advocating for that regulatory clarities for many years to address those similar concerns. It does slightly appear that the EO approaches these concerns around illicit finance and ransomware and national security from the perspective that the industry isn't already operating in this way, and that they don't already employ really effective systems and controls to mitigate illicit finance, and don't already today work closely with law enforcement. And I know you could speak to that in spades. So I was struck by a quote this morning from Senator Lummis, who tweeted that, the overwhelming majority of digital asset users are law-abiding and actually trying to make the financial system better. I think the other thing that was encouraging to see is the request for a report on the connections between blockchain and short, long, and medium term economic and energy transitions. We have seen, a number of criticisms being raised across the digital asset mining space that aren't always as informed about the actual way that miners are contributing to the communities that they live in and really aiding, and in some cases, completely funding the transition to renewables. So we look forward to that report. I think that will be interesting. Overall, I think this whole of government approach has the real potential to actually move the needle on regulatory clarity, which is critically important, encouraging adoption, and hopefully just maybe diffuse some of the less helpful narratives that the industry has been the subject of by its skeptics.
Yeah, no, I'd love to kind of, Dante, to get your thoughts on some of that. I mean, what I was really struck by was, I think over the years, there's been a narrative around sort of, should we ban this technology? And it seems like now it's really a 180 from there to very much the US should be a leader and take a position of leadership in the world on cryptocurrency. And I thought that was a pretty extraordinary. I mean, essentially, as the EO begins with a discussion of the growth of the crypto economy and, then digs into financial inclusion. And I thought it was pretty extraordinary. Yeah, the risks are real. We all know that. But so is the power and promise of the technology, which I thought was sort of a really nice framing. Dante, I know you've given this a lot of thought, even just today, as you do with everything, and really are a thought leader in the space. Would love to kind of get your thoughts on, or initial impressions, at least, on the EO.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Ari, for convening, as you say, a dream team to be able to read the ins and outs of this executive order. From my vantage point and from Circle's vantage point, we completely embrace every facet of it. I do think any sector operating on the margins of having a whole of government approach to reviewing it, as critical as this one, Web3 needs to be seen as fundamental new infrastructure. What I really applaud about the executive order is that beyond looking at merely financial services implications, I think there's an opportunity in here by widening the remit and the perimeter of study and review across the government to look at opportunities for public-private partnership, to look at the void, frankly, in the United States of digital public goods. As you know, when I'm not trying to explain crypto to the planet, I feel like I'm a part-time public servant and full-time observer of U.S. global national security and other competitiveness issues. And so much of the executive order, frankly, echoes many of the issues I've been personally calling for years. And so it really is heartening to see it start to come to a head, right? Or come to a point of time where the U.S. is calling for clarity here. In that call to action, I joined 40 leaders, not national security leaders, with the American Security Project not long ago, and sort of underscoring exactly these opportunities. So my starting and ending point is exactly the same. That if we want the dollar to be the currency of the internet, we need that blend of responsible public-private innovation, and we need an operating and regulatory environment that encourages that. That's fundamental to Circle's business model and open premise. But similarly, if we want the ability to empower people to participate in new forms of digital financial services, new forms of financial inclusion, where our traditional brick and mortar operating model has reached a point of diminishing returns, then we need to embrace these innovations and these technologies. That doesn't mean the industry gets a pass. That doesn't mean we subject consumers to internet funny money or vaporware or scam coins and whatever else may be out there. And I think this blend of a not only whole of government, but frankly, whole of industry embrace of this executive order should be widely encouraged. Now, it also then, of course, will yield policy action on the Hill. Therein, having sat in the Senate Banking Committee recently, and our CEO was in the House Financial Services Committee not long ago, therein I remain very, very equally optimistic that the United States will, maybe late to the game, will eventually declare a win, not a zero-sum win, but a win nonetheless in digital assets, and making the United States the jurisdiction of reference for how the digital assets industry continues to evolve. So every facet of the executive order, and frankly, the opportunity to continue engaging and walking through the front door is widely received. And you may have seen my note. I wrote that very late last night, just kind of anticipating, but also partly being able to read between the lines of what this executive order would mean for Circle, but for the broader industry, and hopefully what it ultimately means for people. If you think about what you can and cannot do with your money today, and what you ought to be able to do with money today that you're not enabled to do but for these innovations and but for responsible balance of public interest and private sector innovation. I think this is a really important sign.
Dante, thank you so much. And I'm going to ask Carole one more, and then I'd like to do sort of a lightning round where I get a sense of sort of like, what is your number one takeaway? But Carole, I did want to kind of like dial back on one thing. Obviously, from TRM's perspective, we're focused on compliance and illicit finance risks and really mitigating those, working with the industry and working with law enforcement. Can you talk a little bit about sort of, I think you dug into this a little bit, but if you can kind of dig in a little bit more to sort of what the EO says specifically about illicit finance and money laundering. And I noticed specifically that there's probably, and I don't have it on top of my head, maybe 3 or 4 separate reports, of various kinds that, between Treasury and Department of Homeland Security and DOJ and others. Would you just talk a little bit about sort of what the EO says on illicit finance and compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So it does point to the fact that there are illicit finance and national security risks that are potentially presented by digital assets and things that we can mitigate leveraging U.S. government authorities as well as partnerships with industry and some of the features that digital assets can provide. So basically, we point to the national anti-money laundering strategy, something that's required by Congress and which Treasury puts out. And once Treasury issues that and submits it to Congress, the idea is that the entire interagency will work together, like it outlines specific agencies in the EO to work together to develop an action plan. So making sure that we're leveraging the resources and authorities of lots of different agencies to come to the table to be able to achieve those objectives, to make sure that we're mitigating illicit finance risks related to the misuse of digital assets. So I think that what it says there is that we are now underneath that interagency policy process, bringing together lots of resources and authorities that maybe had not been sequenced in a mutually supporting way to go after and mitigate specific illicit finance risks. Like we may see that agencies decide to point to research and development authorities that can be brought to the table, or other types of partnerships that can be brought, or diplomatic efforts beyond just the ones that have, of course, long been underway. In the veins of the Financial Action Task Force, Treasury's work, law enforcement, and other regulatory efforts. So that there are a couple of other reports, like looking at the role that law enforcement plays related to combating illicit use of virtual currency, and any recommendations for how we can enhance international partnership with authorities. A lot of the greatest vulnerability that's being exploited in the digital asset ecosystem is the absence of sufficient international frameworks and regulations put in place for anti-money laundering for digital assets. So continuing to drive that and work with partners, leveraging ongoing White House initiatives like the Counter Ransomware Initiative, where 30 countries already committed to implementing those frameworks and working together to combat that misuse. So there's a lot there. And then, of course, I think the signal to industry also on these objectives, like the president is not just speaking to agencies. This was issued publicly. So industry can also think about what it can do to partner with agencies that are trying to figure out what actions they should be bringing to the table, what authorities should be brought, and what can industry do to help make sure that the ecosystem evolves in a way that meets all of these objectives as well.
That's really well said. And I know Teana will be leading the charge there when it comes to trying to work with the agencies on sort of, thoughtful regulation. Just sort of like for my own quick inside baseball, I think, folks should kind of understand what the function of the National Security Council and the White House is, right? What you do essentially is you bring the interagency together, where there's a series of meetings at the highest levels, the principal level. There are deputies meetings, there are working level meetings. And really, essentially, the role is to bring all of the interagency together because, as we say, sort of we're stronger as that, fist than as, separate fingers or the separate pieces. And that's really, to me, that's what this executive order did, right? It's you using that organizing power and that sort of capability at the White House to kind of bring the interagency together around crypto. Teana, I feel like Carole set you up for a good sort of jumping off point. I would love your kind of just quick, if you have one takeaway from this, what will it be? And also sort of she kind of mentioned the ability of the industry to really work, or private sector to work with policymakers here. Just any kind of final thoughts?
Well, I'll echo Carole's focus on the international cooperation. I think that this is a fantastic step for the U.S. to work across agency and be cohesive and considered and, coalesced in its approach toward the industry across the varying agencies in the US. But I think even more importantly, we can take this leadership role to really bring together an inter-country and inter-jurisdiction set of standards and guidance and potentially principle-based rule sets that enable certainly the commercial companies in this space that are trying to operate across jurisdictions to have a rule map, for the road so that they can, build these businesses and grow adoption. I think that's critical, especially for illicit finance, but also for, the overall development of, Web3 and the transfer of value globally.
Thank you so much. Really well said. Dante, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Well, again, Ari, thank you for the rapid fire convening. I think, as you know very well, the power of a public financial ledger that can record a micro payment with the type of auditing fidelity that would make the big accounting firms blush is providing few places for illicit actors to hide. And candidly, perhaps more so than any other area of the crypto economy, the fact that the United States is the beneficiary of what I characterize as a digital fire brigade, companies like TRM Labs and others who can be responsive to a host of complex emerging risks that are attendant with this type of innovation, I think is really powerful. Circle, just in the last month, has joined major industry companies and operators and developers in launching a decentralized identity standard called Verity, in launching a travel rule compliance network called Trust, in joining the Crypto Market Integrity Council. So, the month of February, in addition to being Black History and African American History Month, in some ways was Crypto Market Integrity Month, at least for us. And we think that innovation is the next layer of work that has to be done fundamentally, because the compliance problems that are attendant in DeFi, in self-hosted wallets, and all of these other issues ultimately hinge on the world's void of having a privacy-preserving way of identifying people and counterparties on the internet. We're going to solve for that. And this executive order and the ability to have a low risk, jeopardy reduced environment in which innovation, public and private sector actors can come together and describe the risk, reduce the risk, and come up with long range dynamic approaches to addressing it is really powerful. That's the piece of the puzzle I'm most interested in seeing come on the other side of the executive order.
Dante, thank you so much. And Carole, I'm going to have you drop the mic here. And I know this is a hard question. It's like asking you which child you prefer. But if there was one message here that really the White House that you even personally wanted to sort of have come out of this executive order, what would it be?
I think just in sum, what I would say is that the CEO recognizes and reinforces U.S. leadership in the global financial system. It's also taking steps to safeguard the long-term efficacy of critical national security tools like sanctions and anti-money laundering frameworks, ensuring that digital asset ecosystems evolve in a way that's consistent with democratic values and protecting Americans and businesses and consumers and the integrity of the financial system. This is something that I believe that this EO will help the sector. This will help the U.S. government in pointing all agencies in the same direction and understanding how we can use our authorities in a mutually reinforcing way. I'm just really excited about the direction that the president has given with this order, and working with industry and international partners are really critical here. Like both Dante and Teana mentioned, I really appreciate the fact that the importance of partnerships are really key and underscored in the EO. So I would ask for industry to take to heart that message and what role that you can be playing to make sure that the direction of the digital asset ecosystem is consistent with what the president has outlined here and the policy objectives that he sees as needed to ensure America's leadership in the global financial system.
Carole, Teana, Dante, really, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming on short notice. Thank you for sharing your expertise in this really extraordinary moment. And thank you for sort of working with us to build a safer financial system for billions of people. That's what we're all doing. And I feel like this executive order is sort of part of that journey. Thank you so much for joining TRM Talks, and really looking forward to talking to you guys soon.